The Suicide Squad, which is, I'd say, a soft reboot of Suicide Squad, written and directed by James Gunn. And honestly, it's kind of an amalgamation between a reboot and a continuation. Not so much a sequel, just more of a continuation, in that the main premise is a reboot, but then within the story and the character studies, there are pre-existing characters, and within the pre-existing characters, they already know each other, and they associate with each other as if us, the audience, already understand what they went through together and everything. So, and I do like that, actually, because it's different. Just like the Spider-Man trilogies, we have like 7 of them. You know, they kept rebooting Spider-Man, rebooting, and they kept getting more comic accurate, and then they kept getting more comic accurate, but with an amalgamation of comic accuracy that they kind of meshed together different comic books, but that's besides the point. But it was kind of refreshing that James Gunn wrote the story and characters this way, because it was refreshing, and it was a newly done thing where it's a reboot but also a continuation within the reboot. So the first Suicide Squad, released in 2016, that was written and directed by David Ayer, who made End of Watch, a couple other films I can't remember off the top of my head, but from what I remember correctly, David Ayer's films, I liked at least 90% of them. And yes, even Suicide Squad I did like. I thought it was still a fun film. But it was just a complete incoherent mess. After David Ayer finished his film, and he passed it over to Warner Bros., and they did not like it at all, so they literally just chopped it out, exactly like they did Batman v Superman, and they just stitched it together and then threw it into the theaters. The Suicide Squad is not that at all. This was written and directed by James Gunn, and the Suicide Squad is James Gunn's DCEU baby. Warner Bros., you can just tell they kept their hands off of it this time. And whether you like it or not, it's still a full-fledged story. It tells a full ongoing story from beginning to end. And the number one thing I can say as a huge positive with the Suicide Squad is that it's serious, but it's hilarious at the same time. Suicide Squad was kind of muddled down in its serious tone, combined with the humor, but the Suicide Squad embraces the humor. And if you know James Gunn, he made all Guardians of the Galaxy films so far. He bases his stories revolving around the humor, and it always works. And in the Suicide Squad, it's no different. The humor always lands, and they have jokes against each character, but they also have a very diverse range of jokes. It's not just like lefty jokes or conservative jokes or, racist jokes or anything like that. They actually have jokes that appeal to everybody. If you don't laugh at least one joke in this film, I don't know what to tell you. You just don't know comedy, I guess. I'm not gonna say that you don't know comedy if you don't laugh at the entire thing, but if you can't laugh at least one funny thing in The Suicide Squad, I don't know, grow a funny bone. Outside of the humor and the well-written dialogue, and those two combined are magnificent in The Suicide Squad. Whenever James Gunn focused on the comedy in any of the writing, 10 out of 10, completely. The story and narrative itself, there are a lot of twists and turns within the narrative, but the story itself is kind of a cliche and rote, been there, done that story, especially with it being the second Suicide Squad, because it is essentially the same kind of story structure as Suicide Squad. It's just definitely a lot more coherent. It's not really a bad thing because it was entertaining and interesting throughout the entire film, especially the villain. I'm not going to spoil it, but the CGI villain in this one, 10 out of 10, and 1,000 times better than Suicide Squad's CGI fest of a villain. And there's an actual backstory. There's actually a good amount of intrigue behind the villains in this one. Now, the central characters, like I said, there were pre-existing characters. There were also new characters. This is a bit of a problem I have with the film, The Suicide Squad. Combined with all the characters and the story structure, it was made and edited a lot better than Suicide Squad, where we didn't have 6 different intros in this one, but we still had a couple intros in the first 20 to 30 minutes. And don't get me wrong, each intro that led up to the continuation of the story, they were really funny. Like, hands down, every scene in this is, at the very least, very, very funny. Hilarious, honestly. And all of the characters, they get their chance to shine, at the very least in the comedy department, but also in the story. Even King Shark, who, his character barely even speaks a coherent sentence. Literally, there's a part in the film, and it's in the trailer, so it's not really a spoiler, but there's a part that Waller asks any questions, everybody raises their hands, and they ask the dumbest questions, and then King Shark raises his hand, he's just like, they call on him, and he's just like, hand. Yeah. That kind of stuff is funny to me. It may not appeal to you, but it's a sense of relief that this film in no way, shape, or form takes itself seriously. There are serious moments in the film because of the story, but it's not like grim like Batman v Superman or what they were trying to do with Suicide Squad. And another thing I have to add too, the whole Joker love fest in Suicide Squad, where Joker, and don't get me wrong, I actually really appreciated Jared Leto's Joker. He was very comic accurate. And this is coming from somebody that doesn't read comics. I know nothing about any of these superhero, anti-hero adaptations. I just research everything that I try to study up on. But the thing is, in Suicide Squad, Joker was meant to be the highlight of the film, and then Warner Bros., I guess, stripped out a good majority of his scenes. In The Suicide Squad, he's nowhere to be seen. And while that's disappointing, it's also a relief, because this is about The Suicide Squad, not the freaking Joker. Another thing pertaining to the characters and the story, Harley Quinn, played by the excellent Margot Robbie, who was born to play Harley Quinn, hands down. Everybody's always said that since Suicide Squad, and I agree with that. The problem I have with Harley Quinn's character in this, it's not so much what she does or what she's given, it's just the sense of, she has big moments, but compared to everything else that she's been in while playing as Harley Quinn, and I'm not looking for a love fest of Harley Quinn in a film either, but to me, Harley Quinn just felt a lot more restrained in the Suicide Squad than any of the other previous films that Harley Quinn played in. Like I said, she has big moments in this film, but compared to all of the other Harley Quinn-esque films, she has things to do, and she's a pivotal part of the main story, yes, 100%. But I just feel like they could have done just a little bit more with Harley Quinn, like I said. And it's not the acting, it's just the writing and putting her in the story. I just feel like they were restraining her character a bit too much. And if they were to go out and explain it's because it was her and Joker in the regular Suicide Squad and they were trying to tame it down, okay, that's understandable. But this is supposed to be its own rebooted Beast. And this clocks in about 2 hours and 10 minutes. And every main character, I'm trying not to spoil things, but every main character is in the film throughout the entire thing. Now, they do try to give you a bunch of unexpected twists and turns right at the very beginning. And all the intros, like I said, they're really funny at the very least, but they also continue the bad trend for Suicide Squad films of intro, and then backtracking, and then backtracking, and then intro. It's not nearly as muddled and exhausting in the Suicide Squad as it was in 2016 Suicide Squad, but they still do it a little bit. I believe they have 2 intros technically, and they have like 3 to 5 different backtracking segments in the film where it's like 3 days earlier and then 8 minutes earlier and stuff like that. The action itself is extremely violent. If you're a squeamish person that can't handle blood and especially gore, I'm sorry, you probably won't be able to handle this film because this is an extremely graphic film. Extremely graphic. From what I've researched and people have told me, they stuck to the source material as much as they could for the film's adaptation. And that also includes the blood, gore, and action. And I'm okay with it. I'm not squeamish. So to me, it's how well done is an action sequence. And for the most part, they do it very well throughout the film. There were a couple sequences near the end that, I don't know, to me, it felt like they were just kind of glorifying how much money they were able to put into this film. Like, there's a sequence where one of the characters is dropping, and they just keep dropping onto layers and layers of a building, and the camera goes out to like a B camera that's an outside and just shows the whole thing going down. I don't know. To me, it just felt like James Gunn was just like shoveling money, just saying, let's do this sequence because it's going to look awesome. And sure, it looked great. I mean, it also semi-looked fake. It led up to a continuing of the story. Yeah, and I'll grant it that much. But was the sequence itself, how they shot it, and why they shot it, was it necessary? I think they did the why as a justified reason, but how they shot it, I don't really think so. It just didn't really appeal to me. I'm okay with big budget action sequences, but there are those, and then there are, here's all the money we can show off. And to me, that's really just what that one scene in particular felt like to me. Another gripe I have with the storytelling, and it also has to do with the direction and the editing, is but within the second and third acts, there are some moments where it starts to vibe out from itself, and it doesn't really meander because it does always tell a story throughout and to fruition, because it tries to be multi-layered, but in doing so, it kind of starts to feel aimless every now and again, because it'll be in the current time period and then it'll backtrack again so that you understand every part of said part of the story, and that's fine, but they do that so freaking much in the Suicide Squad that it does start to feel like it's just aimless scenes until you get to the climax on when they are conjoined parts for that part of the story. I think I touched base on everything. There was a lot I loved about this film. The number one thing, it's a hilarious film at the very least. It is hilarious. If you want a comedy, go watch The Suicide Squad. James Gunn never disappoints in the comedy department. He made damn near masterpieces with Guardians of the Galaxy, mainly because of the humor. He knows how to write funny jokes that actually coexist well into fully fledged stories. But then I also have those gripes, and some are minor, some are moderate. I wouldn't really say many, or if any, are a nuisance for a gripe. If anything, I would say the aimlessness, but that would be like a very, very mild to big gripe. So overall, for me, this is not a perfect film again, but it's leagues better compared to the theatrical release of 2016 Suicide Squad. And I say it that way because I know that there's a full-fledged David Ayer cut of Suicide Squad, and I am waiting for that one. That one's going to be rated R, and I guarantee it's going to be at least 2.5 hours long, and I guarantee it'll be a lot better than the almost 2-hour piece of crap we got in theaters. So overall, for me, 2021's The Suicide Squad, it was boosted so much because of the humor, but the story, the direction, for the most part, the writing, for the most part, excels immensely alongside the comedy. But again, this is a comedy through and through, and it's an action comedy where the comedy is sometimes a bit stupid and silly, but it's always funny. I honestly, the first 30 minutes especially, I did not stop laughing, even to catch a breath. I just kept laughing and kept laughing. Even whenever it would get to moderate laughing, I would still be laughing, just because of how they would shoot a scene. They would make it look funny whenever they were getting to another spoken joke. And even with characters that weren't always in the film, they still had, or they tried to give them a bit of background and lore. They didn't really do it nearly as much as the main Suicide Squad team. Like, even the main bad guys, whenever they started to get a background, they ended up not continuing in the film. I'm just gonna leave that at that. I try not to spoil things. Unfortunately, speaking about the story and the narrative and the writing and direction of the Suicide Squad, there are bound to be some mild spoilers at the very least. So again, overall for me, the Suicide Squad, written and directed by James Gunn, is an 8 out of 10. Thank you.